All right. Deep breath.
All right. I hardly think that I need to motivate the need to prepare for interviewing. It's something that everyone in here is going to want to be doing with respect to this field at some point or another. But even though this says now that you're through data structures and algorithms is right about at the same point in how I view the curriculum, you are ready to start interviewing. You're ready to start being useful to companies in the area that do this. Are you ready to be hired and performing at the rate of a worker? Maybe, maybe not. That's probably depending on the individual person, but you are ready to interface with the concept of an internship. I know that when I was an undergraduate, I didn't necessarily feel at this stage of my education, it felt like there was so much to learn and know and understand at this point. That is almost irrelevant to the point of an actual internship. Having been through the student experience, the graduate student experience, and interfacing with the local industry, the business leaders in the area, there is a significant need for people with just a basic coding level that represents and ties to the quality of work that you've given this quarter. I think that a large majority of people in this class are ready for an internship as early as right now. So because of that, it's worthwhile for all of you to start thinking about that. If you don't have an internship lined up for this summer, I would start looking for next year. So internships do frequently lead directly into a position. It's the reason that companies look for interns is that, yes, there is work for them to do, but oftentimes that does lead to a full-time role, especially if they find the right person for them in that internship. So if you're looking for a job after graduation, that process is going to be starting right now with who you can be networking, who you can be getting to know, what opportunities you can start to explore. So good way to get paid over a summer and or an academic term if you're doing it on the side. Internships give you relevant work experience. It shows that you're engaged in your education past just showing up to class and submitting the actual full assignments that are given to you. There's some initiative, some drive in there to get real experience for that. So the interview process starts long before the actual interview begins. But in a lot of times, in a lot of places, the materials that you have learned in data structures and in algorithms form what is going to be the meat and potatoes of an interview. They want to know, what are you capable of right now? They're not meant to test your ability to solve the exact problem that is given to you. And this is something that is frequently misunderstood about interviews. When you are given a problem in an interview setting, they're not looking at, can you solve this problem, or have you seen this problem before? They're looking at, what is your problem solving process? When you haven't seen something before, how can you relate what you have seen before into a workflow for solving this problem? So I am friends with someone who's currently going to be a master's student here next year who is a principal at Microsoft. And in my software engineering classes, he's come in and given a talk because he's been on the other side of industry hiring practices. And what he says frequently is that he's looking at the person. Is this person someone we want to hire? Not is their technical capability something we want to hire? What is their cumulative effect on the rest of the company as we hire them? How well do they individually perform, but also do they bring up people who are around them? Do they create an environment where people around them can perform at a higher level? That means better communication, better expectations. How personable are you? How well do you plan? A lot of that is outside of the scope of exactly the technical question that you would be answering. But a lot of what they can glean from asking you to solve a problem is How do you handle the stress of not having seen that problem before? How do you communicate your process as you go through your process? Questions like that are just as important as your ability to technically perform on the question. They're looking at analyzing and understanding your fit with the company. This is why I design exams the way that I design them, is because I want to train that, so that when you're in an interview setting, you have some experience with applying tools you've seen to problems you haven't seen. So the number of problems or the exact algorithm that you use to solve a problem is a lot less important than being vocal about your thought process. So you want to be talking out loud as you solve problems. They want to know, what are you thinking? Even if it doesn't lead to something on the page, what is your raw process for looking at the problem? So for this, it's not bad if you read the question and don't fully understand it, or see a couple of different ways that you could implement it. Asking clarifying questions shows, one, that you want to do it right, but also that you recognize potential ambiguity in the question and you don't have an issue reaching out and clarifying that. That is a viable and valid work skill in the workplace. You're not going to give them something they don't want or didn't ask for. You will clarify it ahead of time to save everyone some time. If an interviewer either interrupts you or tells you something in the middle of your thought process, let them do that. Don't try to fight back or say, no, I got this. Let them guide you a little bit and help. They're trying to get you to a point where they can see a different part of your process. So let them guide you to be able to better understand you. So you're not going to be scored on exactly how well you did, but a more comprehensive gut feeling about how you performed and how you interacted with the interviewer. So students like to focus on exactly that performance, but it's a much bigger question and a much bigger ask that they are doing to try to understand you a bit better. So they're trying to figure out your analytical skills, your coding skills, your technical knowledge and fundamentals with regards to the computer science, data structures and algorithms that you've seen before, general levels of experience, just what have you seen before? What can you use to incorporate into a solution? But just in general, but also what projects have you worked on in the past? A culture fit, communication skills. Will you be a good fit for the existing team? Will you be able to help the existing team beyond your technical skills? Any questions so far?
Will this be on Bakery?
No.
Oh, okay.
This is completely outside the scope of the class as a whole. It's meant to just be useful to people. Imagine if I said all of this, like it's important for you to have analytical skills, and then I wrote exam questions to force you to memorize this. Truly evil, and also goes against what I'm saying. So going into a technical interview, we'll zoom out here in a bit to look at how to prepare for this in general, but just an intuitive knowledge of data structures and algorithms. It's not worth frequently, unless you're going into a FANG style interview, to crunch leak code and be ready technically. I think that just an intuitive knowledge of data structures and algorithms will take you a long way. Just knowing, again, what tools you can use, even if you can't apply them directly to the problem, saying, this looks like something that could be solved with dynamic programming. Here's a bit of what dynamic programming is. Here's how I see it breaking down into the problem. Even if you can't implement that in the moment, interviewers will recognize this person could easily look up or talk through or design a solution, but they've seen this before. They know what it is and can incorporate it into a solution. The technical knowledge and experience, especially in an internship, is something that can be learned and trained, but knowledge of core components of problem solving are a little bit harder. That's what the education is supposed to be for. The reason they would hire someone who is working on a bachelor's or already has a bachelor's is that you have some of that baseline experience to be able to tie into it. So they'll assume you have a fundamental understanding of the basics. They're not querying the fundamental understanding of the basics. Going into a technical interview as well, or really any interview chain, you should have made sure that you've researched the company as well as the role that you play in that company, either as an intern or as an employee. So take a look at their site, their mission, projects that they've done before. How does that relate to experience that you have or your interests or things that you'd like to interface with? Have that as a talking point prepared going into the interview. It's not so much talking about you and your experience as your fit with the company. And as you're doing that, the more you can tie into your research with them, it shows that you're not just trying to beg them for a job, you're trying to show your fit with their company, and that involves back and forth. Ask them questions that arise from the research that you have on the work that they've been doing. This project that you've been working on looks fairly similar to a project, obviously at a higher level, that I have some experience with. How did you solve this problem? Or is it similar to what I did here? I'm curious to hear how the company is at an industry scale solved this kind of problem. It shows, again, initiative, interest in computer science. You're demonstrating some knowledge, some expertise, some curiosity, and a larger picture understanding of how your work could be useful to their process. If it's an in-person interview or even over Zoom anymore, you should be prepared to write code manually. So be prepared to not have an IDE necessarily. They want to know what you're capable of, especially in an era of AI. Companies are not incredibly sure that anything that you type is your own work or something that you know or understand. So there will be queries into why you implemented things the way that you implemented. So training for this will involve writing code on a whiteboard. Try to get some experience stripped of any IDE support.
I think that's more like pseudocode, or you think they'll expect you to like code in their
Even.
companies? Just like any language you know, probably.
Yeah. Frequently you can pick up a new language or learn a new language. So depends on the company, of course, but high level, they will tell you whether pseudocode is acceptable or whether code. If not, that's a good clarifying question to ask. Are you looking more for a process? Should I be writing pseudocode, or do you want to see line by line exactly how I would implement this in a language? Great question. They don't expect perfect syntax. It's not like you're actually typing this in. They're not analyzing your syntax. But yeah, questions will either ask you to write pseudocode or real code, and they're looking for, they recognize what an IDE can do and help you with. So they're not going to be looking for syntax as much as larger picture ideas embedded into those questions. From an outside perspective, or from the company's perspective, how does one select interview questions? That's one thing to think about and know going into an interview. What can you expect by putting yourself in the shoes of the interviewer? What would you do to be able to separate those you want to hire from those you don't? So each interviewer will be selecting their own questions. They can vary within interviewers within the same company. So if you're reaching out or looking at sources like Glassdoor to figure out what have other people experienced in this interview, depending on who they actually get as their interviewer, you might be getting very different questions or different kinds of questions depending on who you're working with. So you can't just look up what have other people done when they interviewed at this company, because it won't necessarily be the same. The questions they target will not just look at your coding skill, but a coding skill that is likely relevant or useful to that company's or that team's skills that they need, their business model, what you'll actually be doing. So if you're interviewing at a larger scale company, expect scalability related questions, things like this. You're not going to get a one class algorithm implementation at a large scale company. They'll be looking at, do you understand cloud-based tools? Do you understand database tools? Can you take an idea and scale it to a large business solution based on your understanding of the underlying components? So you can learn a lot about what you're going to be asked, just based on what the company does. Going back to researching the company, researching the project that they've been working on, be able to tie your experience into their business model, what it is that they're doing. Know more about your role within that company, so be prepared to know what team you would be working on. And if you don't know this, then these are great questions to ask in an interview. What's the size of my team? What is my role within my team? How can my experience best bring the entire team up because we're working together to accomplish something together? It is likely that you may not hear back particularly quickly, but if you don't hear back to something within 5 business days, it's worth politely checking back in. Especially in today's day and age, you very frequently don't get automatic responses if the answer is no. And so reaching back out may open the door for an opportunity to learn from your interview experience. You may be able to ask for feedback. It's also worth noting that just because you've been rejected from a company does not necessarily mean that it is a permanent rejection. You may want to reach back out 6 months later, a year later. You can get offers based on a second application. It may have just been that there was someone who was better for this immediate role at this particular time. They're not rejecting you, the person, they're rejecting you, the applicant, at exactly this moment in time. So especially for larger companies, reach back out, start to be known by that company as a repeated applicant, and they'll know more about you than someone who's applying for the first time, especially if you've started to go through an interview experience and been known by recruiters, known by technical members of the company. Best practice, don't spam them with a new application immediately after rejection, to always have an application in the process. Wait 6 months to a year before you reapply at the same company. But don't let the fact that you interviewed once keep you from doing it again. Okay, that's kind of a large scale, the day of the interview, but preparing for the day of happens a long time before the interview begins. So what should you be thinking about in the short term? Start to perfect your resume. We have a career center. It's very worthwhile to work with them. They are not a technical career center, so they won't be able to help you perfect your computer science resume for the exact position that you're applying to, but they can help you figure out what kinds of experience are worth putting on your resume and what is worth
Leaving out?
leaving off. Yeah. As well as, so my recommendation is never send the same resume out twice.
Oh, that is a problem.
Customize it to the position that you're applying for. Have a resume document that's much longer than the 1 page you're going to send out to people, with all of your experience, all of your projects, everything that you've done. And then you will select the most relevant parts of that to put on a 1 page customized resume that you send to a particular company. So you're selecting the most relevant experience. If you send out the same general information about yourself, you're much less likely to be exactly the candidate that the company is looking for, and you're less likely to be reached out to.
Wonderful.
In an era where there are more and more applicants, more remote work available, you need to be a higher quality candidate than you have in the past. And the way to be a higher quality candidate is not necessarily just getting more experience, it's tailoring your communication to the company and to the role that you're applying for. The time that you spend doing that will pay itself back, and just you need fewer and fewer actual applications out in order to get feedback, in order to get interviews, and eventually a job. Take classes with big projects. It's worthwhile to be able to show what you can do, but if you have the opportunity to take elective 1 versus elective 2, it's not just about which class is easier, which class is more likely to get you an A. It's what's most relevant or related to what you want to be doing, so that you have the relevant experience And then you want to be able to show something from that. You want to be able to take the work that you're already doing in class and have it immediately apply as an outcome to help tie you into the positions that you want to get. If you don't do this, then you're doing work on your own on the side. And we all know how busy we all are. We're all incredibly busy. If we can avoid needing to tackle large scale projects outside of class for the sole purpose of showing what you can do, then avoid that work. Incorporate it into the classes that you're already taking. So this is what showcases your capabilities to interviewers, and you're already in the university setting. Make sure that the university setting is working for you. You will probably still need to build your own projects, but you shouldn't be wasting any of your time. Wasting is certainly probably a bad word to use there, but if you have spare time and have spare ability, think about what are the biggest weaknesses in your presentation of who you are and what you're capable of. Do something that builds skills. Do something that makes your resume look better. It shows that it makes you stand out. You should certainly have a professional GitHub. This is not necessarily the same as your personal GitHub. It should have a professional sounding name, including your name, and it should be very well organized. Don't leave the projects that you work on in their original state from the class. As you learn more, as you get more experience, iterate back on the projects that you've solved and incorporate your knowledge to make each project, even if it's a basic data structures project, make it represent the you of today. Go back and document it better. Go back and decompose it better. The outcome is the outcome. You can show that you can make a stack, but does it really demonstrate the best of your capabilities? That way you can have that public GitHub, you throw that public GitHub on your resume, and anyone who is interested in you as a candidate can go look at the quality of work on their own time if they truly think that you are a good fit. And this is how you go from a short list for a first interview to the top of the stack. It's how you get noticed, it's how you become the candidate to be. You should be thoroughly documenting your code to a language standard. So the reason I use Java docs in here for anything submitted in Java is it is an official code standard, documentation standard, and you should strive to do that. If you have a Python project, you should document it with docstring. Just make sure that you have professional looking documentation for everything that you've done. A lot more can be done with your resume. It's a big step of a process, and more frequently it's being done with AI, which means that you can't rely on a human, and you're not speaking to a human with the very first glance of your resume. You're speaking to a program, and a program that is going to auto accept or auto reject. There are additional things to think about when you construct your resume. The first big thing is any complicated formatting in your resume, toss it. Have no complicated formatting on your resume. Bullet points are okay, tables are not. There's no guarantee that an AI is capable of parsing that table and adequately being able to read everything on your resume. So recruiters or AI spend a fixed amount of time looking at your resume. The very first thing I do if a student brings me a resume is I set myself an internal about 10-second timer, and I try to figure out what can I glean about this person in 10 seconds. So think about that when designing your resume from a high level is what can I get out of 10 seconds here? If you have very long, verbose, but good experience and projects, I cannot parse that in 10 seconds. If I don't know where to find the projects that you've done, then I can't reasonably easily tell. And if I am deep into hours of looking at resumes, I'm not necessarily going to be giving this resume a thorough read through. I'm gonna be looking for in 10 seconds, is this an auto accept or auto reject? Does it go on the short stack to look at in larger detail or not? So yeah, it's becoming harder and harder to keep all of that in mind, but I find that what separates those who are getting the opportunities that they are qualified for and those who are not getting the opportunities they are qualified for can boil down to something as simple as how you outline your resume. What information is easily accessible? Don't put skills and experience on a list of skills and experience that does not have an associated project. If you say, I have significant Python experience, and I look back at the projects that you've done and nothing mentions Python. How did you put that there? Why did you put that there? You don't have any evidence that supports it. Try to paint a full picture on the resume. You don't need to say that you have significant Ruby and PHP experience if you're applying to a position that's not going to touch that. Again, customize everything to what you can support. So yes, formatting for your resume, absolutely vital. The important information should pop visually. And do make sure you keep that resume to a single page. If there's less relevant experience, if there's outdated experience, don't incorporate it. Keep it tailored to that position, as relevant as you can to that position. Same thing for your employment history, most relevant and most recent experience. You're not looking to show them what you did in middle school at this point. It's not relevant to the outcomes that they're looking for out of your resume. It's just going to hide the relevant information that much deeper in your resume. Make sure you write accomplishments in ways that are easily readable. So if you say, I accomplished X by implementing Y, which led to Z, if I'm skimming this in 10 seconds, I can immediately just look at bullet point, accomplishment, 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 accomplishment. I don't have to read how you accomplished it unless I'm interested in the accomplishment. Think about that from the entirety of the perspective of the person reading your resume. If you start with, I implemented this, and you start with the experience that you had, then I have to read the entire bullet point. It's likely that I'm going to read half to one of those bullet points before I move on to the next section. If you summarize it with the accomplishments, my eyes immediately are attracted to the accomplishments that I am interested in and are relevant to the position. And that way, the relevant parts of your resume are ensured to be read. You don't need to include every project you've ever done. That's what your GitHub link is for. If the most significant 2 to 4 projects that you've done and most relevant 2 to 4 projects for this position are interesting to the recruiter, to the technical lead who's reading your resume, then they will go to your GitHub and look at the other projects that you've done before they take the time and money to significantly consider you for the position. Independent projects are usually better than course projects just because there is some initiative there. It shows that you were interested enough to go do this, motivated enough to go implement something. Everyone has to accomplish everything they need to for a course project, but have a passion project or two, even if that's just if you've worked on an open source project a little bit. You don't need to design your entire project from scratch and implement it. Just go work on an open source project, make a few contributions to that, and then you can add yourself as a contributor to that open source project and talk about that. If you have relevant experience that's significant but old, should it be included? Quite potentially. I would use as the single most important variable, how useful is it and relevant is it to what you would be doing on the day-to-day? If it's old, useful, relevant experience that is how you would be solving the problem, or as useful as if it had been done a few weeks ago, then I would absolutely be talking about it. But if you've done bigger and better things related to that same kind of outcome more recently, list the more recent stuff over everything or just the older stuff. You need a relevant proficiency level with language and software proficiencies. A lot of people will try to say something like, I have a year of experience with Java or 4 years of experience with Java, but what is a year of experience? Were you coding every day? Was that just the course projects in each of the courses that you took? So you have 3 projects worth of experience in 1 year. The amount of time that you've spent doesn't tell anyone very much. So rather than listing years of experience because it's ambiguous, list proficiency levels. So you can use much more demonstrable words like I am an expert, I am fluent in, I have readability and writability in. You can break things down into readability and writability. Things like, I've done a lot of reading of Python, but not a ton of writing of Python. Questions, comments, thoughts? We've gone through a lot so far. There's still a lot to come. But any discussion that's come out of this so far?
For the most part, it's kind of like simple and you don't overthink.
Well, overthink things from another perspective. If you're trying to sell yourself to somebody else, think about their perspective, not your perspective in that. So what is an expert? That is a good question. If you're using proficiency levels, think about your ability to interface with an industry scale project. If you are an expert, then you could be working on the details of an industry scale project. And that's probably not something that a lot of students have a good understanding of on a day-to-day basis. That's one reason that I'm trying to bring in industry scale or industry sized projects into more classes so that you have a bit better idea what that looks like. But if you're passing a class like this, are you an expert? Maybe. It really depends on the extent to which you're engaging with these projects and thinking about things like the extra credit. I would say you are certainly proficient in if you're passing a class like this. You're relatively proficient in Java. But there will be some complex language-specific tools that you have not seen before. And that will be true with regardless of how much experience you have, fairly close to. But look into some of those and think, does it make sense?
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into a preparation map, which is what should you be thinking about based on how long you think you have until a relevant interview. So if it's 1 year before, so this is you today if you are targeting an internship next summer. Be thinking about projects outside of school or work. What is something that's interesting or relevant or would make your quality of life higher? This could be a workflow. This could be something that helps you to analyze feedback. It could be something that solves a problem that you have in your daily life. It could be a calendar. It could be personal notifications. Rather than using an existing tool, build a tool that works for you. Learn more than one programming language. We have a lot of our intro courses in Java, but incorporate and use multiple languages. Has anyone heard of Advent of Code before?
Not one.
A couple people. This happens every December. It's like an Advent calendar of coding problems. They start out extremely easy and get more and more challenging on a daily basis leading up to the holidays. My recommendation is start the easy problems with a new language. This is something that you can be incorporating into your daily workflow in December as just a way of getting experience. It's kind of like leak code. But when the programs become harder and harder to write in a language you're learning, switch over to a language that you're a bit more familiar with. But it allows you to start branching out and seeing how languages relate to each other. What design decisions are inherent in languages in general. It's very similar to analyzing spoken or written languages at a high level. Why do words sound the same or have the same general basis between English and German? Because English is a Germanic language. What does that mean? How do languages relate in that sense? Use that kind of curiosity and apply it to programming languages. What are the design decisions that go into languages? Start building your professional network. When we have things like oh my gosh, words. Deep breath. The career-based events that we have. Go to those, even if just to understand what are the local companies? What are they looking for? If you want to stay locally, not work remotely and not have to move, you should be familiar with what companies are doing CS related work in this area, especially in a way that is interesting to you. So attend events. If there are relatively local academic conferences, you can go to those as a student. Start talking to professors who have interesting and relevant experience that is related to what you're interested in doing. Maybe you can work with them on some kind of directed study that also leads to a conference presentation or leads you to be able to show off of just a poster at a local conference that allows you to network at that conference. You should all have LinkedIn and GitHub accounts. Make sure that they stay updated with relevant work that you've done. You don't want someone to go to a LinkedIn that is 2 years old when they go look you up based on your resume. Find internships. And we already talked about taking classes with large projects, but that's when to be thinking about that. There's a lot to be thinking about. But that's a year out. These are things that you can be passively doing. The advice that I give a lot of people who don't necessarily know what they want to do with computer science is pretend like you're on the job market right now, that you are looking for a position for this summer, even if that's not the case. Go out and look at the active postings. Go out and look at what are the minimum requirements? What are the ideal requirements for candidates? Ask yourself, which of these skills do I have? Which of these skills could I use some extra experience in? And then build a spreadsheet of skills you have and skills that you feel like you're lacking in as you interface with more and more jobs, that if it sounds like you'd like to do this job, pay attention to what they're going to be looking for those kinds of jobs. Use that information to decide which classes you're taking to build the experience for those positions, as well as it will guide your self-study over something like a summer where you don't have an internship. What should you be looking into? What kinds of tools can you be using? Computer science classes are generally not structured to give you experience with individual programs. So if you've been learning about database management, but not necessarily programs that make database management easier, then you can start to see what are the modern tools that companies are using, start to take the knowledge from the class that you took and apply it to the tools that would be useful to apply that material in the workforce. All right, the year of an internship. So at this point, you're planning to apply, or you're in the process of applying to internships, but you don't necessarily have an internship or a job interview scheduled. So continue to work on projects. Start to draft your resume and start to send it out for review from a career center. You can ask a professor that you trust to do a quick look over your resume and say, what are some weaknesses here? Just make sure that you're utilizing your network. Work together with other CS students to look at and edit each other's resumes. It's amazing how much you already know and how much your friends and acquaintances also know that help you in ways that you didn't know unless you ask. Start to make that target list. What companies are doing things that interest you? start to review important concepts that show up in almost every interview. So things like big O notation to be able to analyze the runtime of your own implementations. Start to implement data structures and algorithms from scratch to practice. This is where something like the ICPC programming competition, being able to add that to your resume, but you can combine preparing for an academic event like that with preparing for an internship interview or a job interview. So utilize anything from LeetCode to Caddis to Project Euler to all sorts of practice problems that are out there, but again, interface that with extracurriculars where possible, where you're getting resume support by actively being in a real competition that you're practicing for. It gives you more motivation to do that so that you don't have to motivate yourself to do it all from scratch. You can form mock interview groups with friends where you actually practice having to speak about your experience in real time and get feedback from your friends about how clear was what you said. Did they get an understanding of a project that you've worked on from the description of the project? 1 to 3 months before is probably something like, at this point, you are actively sending out applications. So you're preparing to go through the interview process. So at this point, you should be practicing interview questions, and what will come probably tomorrow at this point are some example interview questions that you should be thinking about and having general answers or just ideas of experience in your past and history to be ready to talk about. So you shouldn't be running completely blind into an interview like this, but you should have some talking points prepared that you've actively thought about in certain ways. Then be doing those mock interviews. Determine what mistakes you've made during the practice so that you can target focus on those ideas, group those mistakes into categories. How clear is my speech? How many times am I using filler words? How frequently am I not describing something at the level of detail that someone who is not technical can understand? So think about why for each of those categories, research some techniques to make fewer of those mistakes. I find that computer scientists can make use of tools like Toastmasters, groups that get together and actually have you present and analyze your presentation skills. Since a lot of us don't get a ton of experience speaking in front of people, we want to put our best foot forward, and outside groups like Toastmasters can help with that. Probably out of time for the day, but I will come back to this and we'll do a lot more tomorrow. We'll start from scratch. We'll start from the beginning of the class. Feel free to come talk to me about this as well. I know we're talking about a lot and it probably seems and sounds pretty overwhelming, but I would be happy to take this general advice and start to apply it to your individual experience and your goals, your individual goals. So feel free to come talk to me about that, as well as I'll have office hours now for anything else related to all of our class outcomes. I will see you soon for that, hopefully. If not, I will see you tomorrow.
So, but we not stay in here for a couple of classes here or off.